Okay, so picking up from where Steve left us at the end of chapter 39, we're now in Genesis chapter 40. And there is Joseph in prison. And it happened after these words that the butler of the king of Egypt, that's the bloke who pours wine into a cup, in case you wondered who a butler was, and his baker offended their lord, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. He put them in temporary custody in the house of the captain of the guard into the prison, the place where Joseph was bound. The captain of the guard gave charge of them to Joseph, and he took care of them. They both dreamed a dream, each man his dream, in one night. Joseph came into them in the morning and saw them, and saw that they were sad. He asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in custody in his master's house, saying, "Why do you look so sad today?" Right, so something is similar between Joseph and these two other people who've been put in prison. It says several times that, like in verse 7, they were with him. They were with him in custody. After these words, this happened. Well, what words? The words of Potiphar's wife, I would say. And the anger of Potiphar, a Pharaoh was angry, and they're put in the same prison as Joseph. And it stresses this, verse 3, they were put in temporary custody in the prison, the place where Joseph was bound. So there was a similarity between them, and I suspect that those two officers had also been falsely accused. And they were there like, oh, this isn't fair. And and there's Joseph. And it says that they offended their lord, the king of Egypt. Well, when you read about Joseph in Potiphar's house, again, he is waiting for his lord, that is Potiphar, to return. Language is so similar. And it is, I would suggest, through bridge building between us and other people, that you have your greatest opportunity of witness. If you lost a child, and so did him or her or they, then you have straight away a commonality. And you see, this is why the Lord had our nature, so that there was a bridge between him and us. And this is what it is, I think, to witness to people, to explore our commonality, that we are in the same boat. And it is that click that happens between people when you realise that my experiences were not unique to me, but it happened to her and it happened to you. Wow. Then, I'm sure you've all had conversations with people where suddenly you realise that, oh wow, you went through that. Wow, I never knew that. And so did I. Yeah. And straight away there is a click. Yeah. Straight away there is a click. And that is the basis upon which you witness. If a number of us, we go preaching, don't we, in central Croydon, and you stand there, hey mate, do you want a New Testament? Mate, do you want to come into a lunchtime church? Yeah, it's all good. That's how I met, by the way. But it's all good, but it's not as effective as you and me clicking with people in daily life. That is the essential witness. And so that's what Joseph does with these guys. He put them in temporary custody, which is where Joseph was. I'm not sure whether Steve made this point, but Potiphar's wife waits till Potiphar comes home, and she holds up this garment, this jacket of Joseph's, and says, "That Hebrew tried to rape me." Like that's a smoking gun evidence. I mean, if you grab my rather beautiful jacket that's down there and say, "Oh, look, got Duncan's jacket, you tried to rape me," be like, and? What's to do with the jacket and raping you?
Exactly, nothing.
Thanks. So, it says that, and of course Potiphar was a eunuch, because they had to be eunuchs to be, high up in Egypt, next to Pharaoh. So there's zero sex life and so forth. And then, the relationship wasn't that great. And she blames him. She says, he, her husband, he brought this Hebrew into our house to mock me. It's all his fault. And when she says this to Potiphar, it says that Potiphar is angry and put Joseph in prison. Angry with whom? With the missus, I would say. He was angry with her and put Joseph in prison. You might think, oh, he got mad with Joseph and said, oh, you're going to prison. No, no, no. If you try to rape the wife of a senior politician, basically, in Egypt, well, you just got killed straight away. They didn't put him in prison, just, killed a guy. He was angry, who with? Her. So he puts Joseph in prison instead of killing him. Now, in those days, they did have prisons, but they were just temporary. If somebody was caught doing something, well, they locked them up. But generally, justice was dispensed quickly. The whole thing of putting a guy in prison for 10 years, 20 years, no, they didn't do that. And you can see that in the law of Moses. There was no prison system under the law of Moses. Sort the issue out, make them either kill him in judgment or retribution, sort it out, pay some money, give some animals, and done and dusted. This prison system, like there is in the moment in this country, just wasn't there. So it's very unusual that Joseph should spend years in prison. And what sort of prison was he in? Well, it says, these two guys were put in temporary custody. The prison he was in was used for short-term custody. That's all the prisons were. But he's in there for years. So you might think that that was sort of, oh, poor Joseph, Potiphar kicked him in prison. Well, actually, he was trying to save him. And the captain of the guard gave charge of them to Joseph. The captain of the guard? So the guy who runs the prison is the captain of the guard. Joseph is sold into Egypt, and who buys him? Potiphar, the captain of the guard. This is the same bloke, I'm sure. And that's why it says he asked for his officers who were with him in custody in his master's house. Who was his master? Potiphar. And who does Joseph end up marrying? The daughter of Potipharah. Now, there are no vowels in Hebrew. Potiphar. You can put the vowel as you want. O, E, I, as you fancy. So I reckon he ends up marrying Potiphar's daughter. Just a tale. So straight away you see that there is a silver lining to all this. And the captain of the guard gave charge of them to Joseph. It's the same word used about how Potiphar gave charge of his household to Joseph. And of how Jacob had given charge to Joseph for his flocks. So you see how things repeat in your life. He was in charge of the flocks. Oh, then he's sold into Egypt. Oh, he's in charge of Potiphar's house. Oh, he's chucked into prison. Oh, he's in charge of the prison. And he's now going to be in charge of all Egypt. And it's this hallmark, if you like, this stamp of the divine, that this is of God. And it's one advantage of being an older person, being able to look back in your life and you see how circumstances repeat. Let's say you have the neighbours from hell living in the flat next to you. They are partying, doing this, banging on doors at 3 o'clock in the morning. Oh, it sends you bonkers. Oh, fortunately they moved away. Oh, 5 years later, oh, again you got the neighbours from hell. And then you move away. It's a nice semi-detached house, because you're coming up in the world. And then the people in the place next door sell it, and I don't tell the neighbours from hell move in. This is a silly example, but you know what I'm saying. Life repeats. Deja vu. I have already seen this. Why? Because we are being tested. God is a teacher, and your life repeats. Did you learn the lesson? You did? Okay, I'll give it to you again. That's what a teacher does. You got the maths problem right. Okay, I'll give it to you again. And again. Oh, you got it wrong? Okay, well, I'll give it to you again, so then you can get it right. You got it right? I'll give it to you again, just to confirm you. You're getting it right. And you see, Jesus is real, and he is actively working in human life to bring us, as he did Joseph, to himself. Well, he was pretty depressed in prison. obviously, but he sees the other guys sad. And he says, why are you sad, guys? And I think that is the sign, the mark of spiritual maturity, that you look out of your own suffering to that of others. The classic is when the Lord is carrying the cross to Golgotha, and he turns and says to the women, don't cry for me, cry for yourselves. It's like you're carrying a really heavy burden. He's totally focused on carrying that burden. And if I crush a child's beloved toy under my foot, well, I'm focused on carrying this heavy burden. But you see, the mark of maturity is shown by the Lord, carrying that heavy cross, that he's still looking to the others. He's worried about those women, you know. And it's the same with Joseph, not caught up with himself. Oh, you're sad, you know. Absolutely lovely, because that was his mission. To be there for others. They said we dreamed a dream, and there's no one who can interpret it. Joseph said to them, don't interpretations belong to God? Please tell it to me. Well, they believed in those days that if you had a dream, you needed an interpreter. And in Egypt, Babylon, these guys had a special name. And they said, well, we're in prison, we haven't got an interpreter. And Joseph says, well, actually, you don't need interpreters. God will interpret and tell me. He's almost saying, well, I am in the place of God. Of course he wasn't God, but he's saying, I am on manifesting God to you. So tell me. Well, there were two dreams. The chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said, in my dream there was a vine in front of me, and in the vine were 3 branches. It was as though it budded, blossomed, and its clusters produced ripe grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. Joseph said to him, this is its interpretation, the 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and will restore you to your office. You will give Pharaoh's cup into his hand the way you did when you were his cupbearer. And so the baker thinks, well, that sounds pretty cool. But remember me, he says, when it will be well with you, please show kindness to me and make mention of me to Pharaoh and bring me out of this house. For indeed I was kidnapped out of the land of the Hebrews. Here also have I done nothing wrong that they should put me into the dungeon. When the chief baker saw the interpretation was good, he said to Joseph, I also was in my dream, and behold 3 baskets of white bread on my head. In the top basket there was all kinds of baked food for Pharaoh, and the birds ate them out of the basket on my head. Joseph answered, sorry mate, this is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from off you and will hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh from off you. These are double dreams. All the dreams in the Joseph story are double dreams. Joseph, to start with, has 2 dreams. One of his sheaves standing up and the other sheaves bowing down, and then a sun, moon and 11 stars bowing down to him. Same meaning, right? But repeated twice. Here, double dreams. Pharaoh is going to have dreams where he sees 7 fat cows eaten by 7 thin cows and 7 handsome fat pieces of wheat eaten by 7 bad ones. It's a double dream. And at that point, Joseph says to Pharaoh, and this is why it was double to you, because it will most definitely come to pass, and it will come to pass quickly. So double dreams mean it will come to pass. And Joseph, of course, is stuck there in prison, thinking, well, according to my double dreams, my brothers will come and bow down to me in huge gratitude. But that don't look likely, because I've been forcibly, for one thing, I was sold down there into Egypt, they're miles away. For another thing, I've been falsely accused of rape, and I'm here in prison. I've been here for years. This just seems a bridge too far between where I am now and who I am now, and what God says I will be. It seems a bridge too far. Just as it may seem. For a bloke standing by a bus stop, or the tram stop, let's say, on George Street in Croydon, lights up a cigarette and thinks back about his life and thinks, I one day shall live and reign forever on earth and be a king and a prince and a priest and live forever. No. It's a bridge too far. It's a bridge too far. The woman who goes out on a balcony in a subdivided HMO, let's say in, where should we have it? In Peckham, in East Croydon. And it's late at night, and she goes out on a little balcony and she thinks of her abortions and she thinks of the affairs she had and how she nicked money at work, lights up another smoke. I'm going to live forever in glory. I'm going to be a blessing to this whole earth. I'm going to live eternally as a queen, no. It's a bridge too far. But it's not. And you see, this is what faith is about. Faith is trust that what seems so impossible because of me is going to come true. And we're told in Psalm 105 that while he was in prison, the word of the Lord tested Joseph. The word of the Lord was what he had in his dreams, right? He was tested. Do you believe this will come true? And it seemed a very long bridge, too far, over troubled water from where he was then to what God promised him. But God keeps encouraging him because these two guys there's a double dream, and it comes true. And he absolutely believes it. He says, Pharaoh will lift up your head, will restore you, you will give Pharaoh's cup into his hand. And in this section he uses the word will 7 times. And 7 is the number of completeness. So he's saying it will happen. Definitely it will happen. And he's so sure that it will be fulfilled that he says to the butler, remember me when it will be well with you. I know one day you're going to be there, back with Pharaoh, and just remember me, it will be well with you, but please help me get out of this terrible place. And so, he was absolutely sure that dreams come true. Dreams from God come true. And that can happen in your own life, that you see how in the shorter term, God's promises do come true. And that's to encourage you in the longer term, to see that what he has promised to me will also come true. Of course, he could have taken it as the glass, is the glass half empty or half full? He could have taken the glass as half empty and said, well, it's okay for them, butler and the baker, they had double dreams and it came true. Didn't come true for me. Like people say, yeah, religion your faith seems to do you a lot of good, doesn't do me any good. God doesn't ever come through for me, comes through for you, doesn't come through for me. That's how he could have reasoned. But no, he sees rather the fact God came through for you as an encouragement to me that he will, in due course. And he says to them, truly, I was kidnapped out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I've done nothing wrong. Was he kidnapped? No. His brothers grabbed him and said, we hate you, and we're going to kill you. Oh, actually, there's some traders coming. Oh, well, we'll sell you as a slave. He wasn't kidnapped. He was sold for 20 pieces of silver. But because he loves his brothers and was not sitting there in prison, hating them, playing the tape in his head of what they did to him, he talks very positively about them. He doesn't say, oh, you know what, my brothers had a jealousy complex on me because I was a family priest and they wanted 20 pieces of silver, so they sold me down here. No, he says, well, I was kidnapped. Now, he wasn't living in Alice in Wonderland either. Some people, they cope with incredibly bad lives by living in this Alice in Wonderland, where everything's wonderful, and it's not. No. Because later on he says to his brothers, you sold me here, but God sent me here. And he says it a couple of times to them. When he reveals himself and says, I'm Joseph, and I love you, and I forgive you. You sold me here. He's totally clear about what they did. But when he's talking to other people, He's very defensive of his brothers. He says, no, I was just kidnapped. Some bad guys come. I was out there looking after the animals for my dad, and these fellas just appeared and grabbed me and kidnapped me. No, that's not what happened. And I see a similarity with the Lord, that whenever he talks about the disciples to other people, to the Jews basically, he's very positive. Oh yeah, he says, you know, they don't fast, because they weren't religious guys, they don't fast because they're so happy that the bridegroom is with them. No, they didn't fast because they just were secular blokes. He was very positive about them to other people, but when he talks to them, he says, you fools and slow of heart to believe. He's quite, and there's a number of examples where he says, look here, stop. You know, you're wrong. Stop arguing who's going to be the greatest. Be the least. What are you talking about? And that's a bit how the Lord is with us. In his personal relationship with us, he doesn't let anything go. He does discipline. He does say, no, not this way. But in his mediation for us, of us to God, you know, oh, this is my wonderful bride. Oh, isn't she wonderful? Yeah. And that's how Joseph was. Now, he says to the butler, remember me when it will be well with you. And I didn't do anything wrong. Depends how well you know the Bible, but you might see that should make your ears prick up. Who else says, remember me when it will be well with you? Right, if I had a Mars bar in my pocket, I'd say, if you were kids, I'd say there's a Mars bar for that. But I ain't got any Mars bars in my pocket. So who else says, remember me when it will be good with you?
The guy beside Christ on the cross.
Right, Jeremy, there's a virtual Mars bar. Well caught, you caught it very well. Right, it's the thief on the cross who says, remember me when it will be well with you. When you come in your kingdom.
Remember me.
Remember me. And that thief also says to the other bloke, to the other thief, this man has done nothing wrong. Which is just what it says there. So you can see that that guy was on the cross. People say, oh, he was some random geezer, you know. No, he actually was a believer. He knew this because he quotes it. He quotes these words. And of course there was the Lord, and on both sides of him criminals, one to be saved, the other to be damned. And it's the same here. There's Joseph, butler, baker, one saved, one not. So, it happened the third day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer. And he restores the chief cupbearer, hangs the chief baker, and this sad verse. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. It's saying the same thing twice. You know? When I was an English teacher back in the Stone Age, I would have said to a kid who wrote that, I'd say, look here, just say it once. He didn't remember Joseph. You said it once, don't be verbose and whatever. I'd say, but he forgot him. Yes, you just said he didn't remember Joseph. But of course it's emphasising it. He didn't. And that is something I really hate about being human, is our strong tendency to ingratitude, to ungratefulness. Yes. It's a very strong tendency in us to be ungrateful. And to forget. Why did he forget? Oh, because he was busy. Oh, life's busy. Yeah, life's busy. And I'm very grateful that I was brought up by the parents who taught me to say grace for food. That's a dying habit. It's seen as old school. That, oh no, we say grace before we eat.
Of course.
Well, I don't care if it's old school. Good on the old school. You know, be grateful. Be grateful. And thank God for your food. I mean, and for everything else. It happened at the end of 2 full years of days. And I think that phrase is used to say time dragged. Years of days. And there was Joseph. oh, when's it going to be my turn to have, you know, the fulfilment of my double dreams? 2 years. Surely the butler's going to remember me, isn't it? Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by the river Nile. Well, one of the themes you see in this is that God deconstructs, he destroys bit by bit the whole religious thinking of the Egyptians. Pharaoh went and stood by the river Nile. Yes, that's what he would have done to worship, because they worshipped the Nile, the source of, as they saw it, all blessing. And they came up out of the river 7 cows, handsome, good and well favoured, and 7 other cattle came up after them out of the river Nile, ugly, evil and thin. The ugly and thin cattle ate up the 7 sleek and fat cattle. You can go up to the British Museum, and there's the Egyptology section, and you can check all this out. It's so fascinating that they believed that only good came out of the river Nile, that all blessings come from the river Nile. But here he sees, yes, 7 beautiful, handsome cows come up, and out of the same river, 7 evil ones who eat up the 7 good ones. Wow, this is a total attack on their idea of the river Nile. And of course, he dreams a second time, and 7 heads of grain come up on one stalk. Healthy and good, 7 heads of grain, thin, evil, and blasted with the east wind sprung up after them. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy and full ears. Again, you can see in the Egyptians left a lot of stuff behind them, you know, their inscriptions and all that sort of stuff, and writing on papyrus and all that sort of stuff. And for them, if a stalk had 7 heads on it, that had to be offered to the god. But we know what's going to happen with the abundant harvest. It's not going to be fed to the gods, it's going to be fed to the people, you know. Instead of, you know, God save the king, God save the people kind of thing. You know? And the idea, of course, is that the evil is sort of dealt with by the good. These 7 cows were handsome, good and well favoured. I've never seen a cow I would call handsome. But beauty is in the eye of the beholder, I suppose. But that's the very same phrase that is used about Joseph in chapter 39, when it says that because Joseph was well built and handsome, Potiphar's wife fancied him. But it's the same, this is the advantage of being aware of the Hebrew text. The same term is used here about the 7 cows. And of course the idea is that the goodness of Joseph would overcome the evil. So, again, the good ears of corn overcome the evil. It happened in the morning that his spirit was troubled, this is Pharaoh, and he sent and called for all of Egypt's magicians and wise men. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them to Pharaoh. Then the chief cupbearer spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I remember my sins today. And he talks about how Joseph had interpreted his dreams. I remember my sins. Now don't forget, when you read in English or whatever language you are reading in, you are reading through a masked translation. In Hebrew, particularly biblical Hebrew, there is something called the plural of majesty. That is, they use the plural to describe one really significant thing. For example, we might say, Peter, let's say our wonderful cook Peter cooked me 1 super pizza. 1 pizza. And he says, Duncan, here's a pizza I made for you. 1 pizza on my plate. I could say to you, Peter cooked me pizzas. What I mean is, he cooked me 1 very special. That is not there in English at all. But in Hebrew it's there. So, when this guy says, this butler says, I remember my sins, my big sin. And what do you think his big sin was? He's not, I think he was falsely accused. I don't think he actually tried to poison Pharaoh, putting poison in his cup. What was the butler's big sin, his massive sin, that he now remembers?
Spill the drink?
No, you didn't spill any drinks. Huh?
Forgetting promise.
Forgetting Joseph.
Forgetting Joseph. Ingratitude. This was my big sin. My sins. This was my massive sin. That I was ungrateful to Joseph and I let life carry me by.
Yes.
And that is our besetting sin. I don't think that we're going to leave this place after our wonderful retreat here and, I don't know, start drug trading or fornicating or whatever people do. But our big sin will be to let the busyness of life just take me over. So that, I'm not grateful. That's, I think, a big thing. Well, all this that you're reading here about Pharaoh and his spirit being troubled and then, they suddenly called Joseph up. Oh, there's this butler says, there's this Hebrew guy. Oh, get him straight away. Yeah, and he comes in before Pharaoh. Changed his clothing, and Pharaoh says, I've dreamed a dream. No one can interpret it. I've heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. And Joseph says, no. No, it's not in me, I can't. But God will do it. This is all. And then he tells the dream, and Pharaoh's like, oh, wow. And he rewards him, massive, gives him beautiful clothing, gold chains, and everything. This is all absolutely going to be repeated in the life of Daniel, who again is a Hebrew, who again is in captivity, far from home, and a pagan king has a dream and says, I can't understand it. Come here, magicians, you're no good. And then someone says, there's a Hebrew bloke. Oh yeah? Well, quickly bring him here. And Daniel, I think, perceived the similarities with Joseph, because when the king says those words to him, the same words as what are said here by Pharaoh, I've heard it said of you that when you hear a dream you can interpret it. These are the very words said to Daniel. Daniel takes that as a cue to reply with the very words of Joseph. He says, it isn't in me. I can't interpret anything. God will answer you. So, you see how life is set up, that God's word is a living word. It is not a dry letter, it is a living word. And what that means is that as you go through life, you start to see, wow, I am not alone. My experience is not unique. It absolutely resonates with somebody I've read of in the Bible. And the similarities sometimes can be so exact. And that's why he gets it. Daniel gets it. And that's why he replies with the very words of Joseph. When he says, and the king says, obviously made to say it by God, I hear of you that you can interpret dreams. I can't. No, sir. Not me. I can't. Can't help you. But God can. Exactly word for word. And this is the advantage of daily Bible reading and fluency with the Bible. That those characters start to live in your life. And spiritual life gets easier, in a sense, as you mature spiritually. Because it all starts to fit into place. Well, Pharaoh tells Joseph his dreams, and Joseph says the dream of Pharaoh is one. What God is about to do, he's declared to Pharaoh. The 7 good cattle are 7 years, 7 good heads of grain are 7 years. So he's saying that, there's going to be 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. So therefore, sir, I strongly advise you to gather in all the harvest from the 7 good years, and I reckon you need to appoint somebody over that to do the job, and then you can dish out the food in the 7 years of famine. As I said, God is through all this trying to convert Pharaoh, because they had loads of gods, right, in Egypt. They had a god, Enpri, who was symbolised by 7 ears of corn. Well, the 7 ears of corn were going, the good 7 ears of corn were going to be eaten up by the 7 bad ones. So this god is going to be gobbled up. The fertility goddess, this Hathor, was a cow, and the 7 good cows were going to be gobbled up. Osiris was an ox, but always accompanied by 7 cows, and you can see this up in the British Museum there. You wander around the Egyptology section. And if a god were to die, the Egyptians believed there would be 7 years of famine. It's all up there in the British Museum. That's what these guys believed. If a god dies, there will be 7 years of famine. There's going to be 7 years of famine. All your gods are going to die. Wow. And, you know, the 7, I've said that, you know, the Egyptians, they didn't write with, like, you know, Latin alphabet, A, B, C, D and all that. They drew pictures called hieroglyphs to mean words. And the symbol for a year was a cow. So 7 cows is 7 years. So, point of all that is that God was trying to convert even Pharaoh, even the Egyptians with their crazy theology, if you like, about gods and all this kind of stuff. These pharaohs, you know, they'd have a guy in power and they're a bit like Stalin, you know, have someone next to you for a few years and then you kill him, you know. How many cooks did Stalin have? He had loads of cooks, so he kept killing his cooks every couple of years. He's paranoid. And so it was with these pharaohs. But Joseph becomes the leader of Egypt, Prime Minister, for the rest of his life. He doesn't get bumped off. Pharaoh doesn't get rid of him. And he dies at 110, respected by all the Egyptians. And later on, Pharaoh starts to talk about God, which you may think is whatever, not that significant. But bear in mind, they believed there were loads of gods. But I think he came to kind of believe. So you might even see Pharaoh in the kingdom. I mean, this Pharaoh, not the other one. So you see how God works in such a complicated way to save even Pharaoh, who I would have thought, those arrogant people right up the top of society, they're sort of barely human. Don't bother with them. Let's save the ordinary people. Don't worry about the high flyers in society. But for God, you see, every human being is valuable. He sees the meaning and the value of every human person, including the super wealthy and the super powerful, and including the very, very low people. You know, we keep saying that let the poor say I am rich. Yes, but it also goes the other way. God's also looking out for the wealthy because he's looking out for absolutely everybody. And I rather like that because we are not the super wealthy. We tend to forget that. We tend to forget, I do anyway, I tend to hive them off in my mind and think, that's them. That's them. But actually, God literally loves everybody, and that includes the super wealthy and the super poor, all of us. And, we likewise shouldn't discriminate. So, that's God's efforts to win Egypt. So, he explains how it's going to be. Verse 29, there will come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. Yeah, all the land of Egypt. When there was a good harvest, it was because the Nile had flooded higher than it usually did and spread out across the floodplain of the Nile. And there was great harvest. The rest of Egypt was just as it is today, just barren, desert. But what happened here was that the whole land of Egypt suddenly started to bring forth harvest, not just the floodplain of the River Nile, which again was to show it's not the Nile that's giving you good harvests, as they believe. They all worship the Nile, like Pharaoh going out in the morning, stands by the Nile, just like the later Pharaoh did at the time of the Exodus. He stands by the Nile, worshipping the river, the god of the Nile. God's saying, no, there's going to be mass fertility everywhere, not just where the Nile floods. That's what happened. There will arise after them 7 years of famine, and all the plenty, all the good will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. The famine will consume the land. And yes, this is a great thing, that the good that is done, that was done, for example, by Joseph to the butler, was forgotten. This is a terrible feature of us as humans, this tendency to forget the good. This tendency to see the glass half empty. I used to think it was only me who had a problem seeing the glass half empty. Until I started to realise that actually everybody has that tendency. Poor me. Oh yes, I've got all of those blessings. Oh, but you wouldn't believe all the bad stuff in my life. Oh, poor me. You know? And this is it's so psychologically credible. The dream was double to Pharaoh because the thing is established by God. It's sure of fulfilment, and God will shortly bring it to pass. Well, how do you understand the shortly bit? I mean, for Pharaoh, yes, it was straight away. The good harvest began straight away. For the butler and baker, yeah, the double dream, it came true straight away. Within 3 days. What about for Joseph? He thought, well, I've had double dreams, and they're going to definitely come true, and soon. But as year after year dragged by, he would have thought, about how soon this is. And of course, this is an invitation to see the perspective that God has on time. For us, 70 years is massive. For God, it's soon, it's quick. And that is my simple little understanding of the idea that Jesus is coming soon. Even if it's not for another 2,000 years. What's that? It's nothing. It is, a moment. And so that's, I think, how he was trained to see it, trained by God. That your dreams come in true soon, Joseph. But the word of the Lord tested him. In those, what to him were long years. We saw how it started with him saying that there were 2 years of days. And so, fellows, Joseph says, let Pharaoh look for a discreet and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Set him over. This is the very same Hebrew term that's used about him being set over the flocks of his father, set over Potiphar's house, set over the prison and the prisoners. And now he says, find a man to set over the whole of Egypt. Create a new office. There was no office in Pharaoh's government that was like this. He clearly was saying, and I'm here, Pharaoh. I've been set over flocks, Potiphar's house, the prison, and I'll do Egypt. Don't forget, Egypt was the most developed, wealthy civilization on the planet. So he had what I would call spiritual ambition. He knows that one day my brothers will come and bow to me, and one day I shall save my brothers. And he has the ambition to think, now I wonder how I could do that. Well, if there's a famine and I'm controlling the grain, I would be able to save them and save the world. And then they would bow to me in gratitude, and it would all, God's dream would come true. What ambition! For the bloke who was sitting there, he actually says he was bound in prison. Although he had some freedom, it says in Psalm 105 that they hurt his feet with shackles of iron. So he wasn't, in an open prison. He was in shackles of iron, and it hurt his feet. Told that in Psalm 105. And yet he looked out of that to be spiritually ambitious. That's right. It is really like the person who is trapped in minimum wage life, trapped maybe in a family situation that is just too difficult to even explain, but bottom line is it traps you, and you have no freedom of movement. You have got to endure it. What cannot be avoided has to be endured. Day in, day out, hour in, hour out. And there is no way out. Someone trapped in that. Somebody trapped in the shackles of depression or invalidity of one sort or another. To look beyond that and to see that actually one day I shall be doing this, that or the other. Or I would like to be this or do that for God. For God, to save other people. This is what you call spiritual ambition. to not just see what is immediately like right in front of your eyes, and to live life just pedestrian, step by step, face down, head down, looking at your phone all the time, sceptical, cynical, and so forth. No. So, and he says, verse 36, the food will be for a store to the land against the 7 years of famine which will be in the land of Egypt, that the land not perish through the famine. Again, you see that Joseph is a type of the Lord Jesus. John 3:16, God so loved the world he gave his only begotten Son, so that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have life eternal. It's the same here. That through Joseph, the people of the land did not perish. Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? And he talks about God in the singular. Not the spirit of the gods, the Spirit of God is bit by bit coming to a belief in one God. Pharaoh said to Joseph, because God has shown you all this, there is none so discreet and wise as you should be over my house. And according to your word will all my people be ruled. Only in the throne I'll be greater than you. I've set you over all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh took off his signet ring and put it on Joseph's hand and arrayed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain about his neck, just like what happened to Daniel. And he dressed him in robes of fine linen. Well, Joseph and his clothes. He's given the coat of many colours, the robe of many colours, by his father. The sign, he's the favourite son and the family priest. Whoops, it's ripped from him, dipped in blood, and lost that. Then he becomes the boss of Pharaoh, of Potiphar's house. And again he would have had a fine robe that indicated that he was the senior servant. So they used to do. Everyone, the meaning in clothes was significant. Whoops, suddenly I've lost it. Potiphar's wife's grabbed it off me and falsely accuses me of raping her. Whoops, lost that. And now he's given another fantastic garment. If it was given to a less experienced person, he'd have been like, look at me in my fancy jacket. Look at me. But because of what he'd been through, Joseph would have thought, oh yeah, fancy clothes, yeah. I had a really fancy jacket, a coat of many colours, and I lost that straight away. And then I had a really fancy, robe that showed I was the boss of Potiphar's house. Lost that straight away. Okay, yeah, so you give me this fantastic robe. Okay, cheers, Pharaoh. I guess this won't last for very long. It did. It did last. But I'm just saying that you can see God's hand. If he hadn't have had those earlier experiences to someone less experienced, he would have become proud. And you can't see the future, fortunately. But all we can say is that to those who love God, all things work together for good. And as God says to Israel, to do you good in your latter end. And this is where it is too primitive to think that, God's given you a fantastic life and you're only going to get blessings and it's all going to be awesome. And, the old thing in a lot of Pentecostal churches, how was your week? Oh, awesome. How was yours? Oh, absolutely awesome. I ask people that, don't know, in the pub, people come, I say, how's your week been? When people say, oh, awesome, honestly, I'm thinking, as if, I smile like this, I'm very pleased to hear that, but I am thinking, as if, mate, come on. I'm not saying, life's, terribly glum and, reasons to be cheerful, part 3 kind of thing. I'm not saying it has to be like that. But, you know what I'm saying. And so, it ends up, Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paaneah, which could mean saviour of the world. Again, a type of the Lord Jesus. And he gave him Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, a priest of On, as a wife. Priest of On, this doesn't necessarily mean he was a priest. it's like in this country, nobles can have all sorts of fancy titles without them actually being a bishop or whatever, you know. So I do wonder about that. And as I say, there's no vowels there. This is Potiphar. It seems to me. And so there was this guy, Potiphar, who was always hanging in the background in Joseph's life. And sometimes you do have that in your life, that God sets somebody up. Not all the time in your life, but they're there. Like when Joseph meets the anonymous man in the field and he says, "What are you looking for?" He goes, "I'm looking for my brothers." "Oh, they're going to Dothan." Okay. So, that is where we are up to. Now, we're going to split into our discussion groups. It's about the only talk I've given where I actually kept to time and didn't go over time. I'm surprised. Right, so you should all have these discussion papers. If you haven't got one, there's some here. And we are, of course, down to Genesis 40 and 41. There's a lot of questions here, and it goes just over the page. And I suggest that in your groups, you just work through them. One of you, just if one of the questions speaks to you, like when have common experiences unexpectedly bound you together with others? You know, you might want to talk about that. God's word of promise tested Joseph. Have you had such tests and passed them in this life? What can you be spiritually ambitious about in your life? Like Joseph was ambitious. You know, I want to be the ruler of Egypt, so that I can be a blessing and save my brothers as God intended. God intended. So, I don't know if you want to stick in the same groups that you were in before, or do you want me to split you into different groups?
No, different.
Yeah. Somebody wants the same group, someone else wants different groups. They didn't like
yeah, just so that you get to know people.
So you get to know people.
Yeah.
Right, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Bartik 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. So all the ones, you can go, I guess, in the kitchen. The 2s can stay here, and the 3s can go into the 3s room.